So let's talk about how to make loads of money by selling people model soldiers. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're doing a quick guide in how to absolutely maximise the amount of money that you can squeeze out of model soldier releases. Hopefully this will help all of you with your own miniature companies at home, if you really want to make your customers pay through the nose. So firstly we have the easy bit. You merely have to become established as one of the biggest and strongest settings for sci-fi miniatures, with a crazy amount of lore background and scope to your universe, to the extent where people have written hundreds of novels about the characters in your setting, and the universe itself bleeds into popular culture to recruit new players. Then have a crack team of miniature developers, and you simply have to produce some of the nicest plastic miniatures out there, and from there you can pretty much do what you like. You'll get yourself a nice captive audience, so even if you don't play things particularly well sometimes on the game balance or public relations front, you'll still have a very loyal cadre of people who are utterly indoctrinated with your world and will stick with you through thick and thin. You can even make the hilarity levels unbalanced editions such as Warhammer 40k 6th and 7th editions, and you'll still have plenty of people happily play through that. Provided the lore and some cool miniatures come out, it won't be too hard to maintain your monopoly on the wargames industry, and even if people do jump ship from your flagship product, you can have multiple different systems of the game for people to try out instead, so create a big lineup of skirmish games and other game systems, so even if they get tired of the main game, they'll still be buying from you. Getting people interested in the hobby is a really big step. I try and have some gateway products to get people thoroughly interested, and if at all possible I try and get them started at an early age. Maybe you could have some kits that you can send out free for schools. Sure, it's a little bit of investment in the short term, but if you can sway a few of these impressionable young minds to your game, you might have some lifelong followers of plastic crack for life. When you're trying to hoik people into the hobby, it's good to have some really cheap options where they can get in easily. Have some pretty reasonably priced starter sets where you can get a couple of armies fighting against each other for not all that much investment, but also have a bunch of products that are aimed at the more affluent customer where the sky can really be the limit in how much you can spend. You certainly want poorer people to give you money, but you want richer people to give you even more money as well. It's certainly not unreasonable to have your very biggest miniatures sell for about the same price as you could buy a used car. When it comes to releasing new kits of miniatures, there are all sorts of tricks that you can employ. Firstly and most importantly, I would certainly cater to your audience. If you make more and more miniatures for the most popular faction in the game, it will most certainly sell more. In fact, you can create a pleasing snowball effect by having more and more support for the one faction, so more and more people play it, and then you'll make even more money for releasing kits for it. It doesn't matter if a few of those units might be a bit redundant, say you have 4 or 5 different types of superhuman soldier in exo armor, and it will really give you something to fill out the rulebooks for them, if there are literally hundreds of units to write rules for. Of course, it can't always be good times. Sometimes you do have to hold your nose and release some kits for the NPC factions. After all, the poster boys do need at least some factions to beat the snot out of, so every so often it is worth throwing them a bone. Even if you're not just doing new releases for them, you can still add a bit of interest. Maybe take a box that was already on sale, half the number of the miniatures in it, and sell it for roughly the same price. This will make your Dire Avengers and your Cadian Shock Troops feel even more exclusive. So what about the actual miniatures that we're releasing then? Firstly, I think it's important to make each new release as unique as it possibly can be. You really don't want people converting miniatures to represent the new characters that you're releasing, so try and give each character and squad some odd defining feature that really wouldn't be all that easy to make from bits. If you employ some super copyrightable names such as Noxious Blightbringer or Biologus Putrefier, you'll not only be able to defend your IP, but also cement them as their own unique miniatures and not just something that you could kit bash. Eventually your miniatures might get a bit dated, and this is a good chance for renewing a kit and getting people to buy the same miniature all over again. One of the best ways to encourage people to make the jump from the old one to the new one is to increase the size of the updated model on each subsequent release. The benefit of this is twofold. Firstly, you can charge more for the miniature. More plastic will make people feel a bit better about paying a bit more, and also it will make people with the older miniatures feel like they're playing with something redundant and out of date, and hopefully they'll feel emasculated if they ever see the old and the new miniatures side by side. There's also the question of game rules as well. Technically you might be gaining an unfair advantage by playing with a miniature that's smaller than it should be. You don't need to ban outright miniatures, but community pressure should do a lot of the work for you. Finally, when pricing miniatures, it's important to remember that you can charge for bigger models and also for other factors such as costing more points in game or being newer and more recent sculpts than the previous. Sure, a lot of your character miniatures might be the exact same size as the basic troops for the army, but because they're wearing a fancy hat and have a cool banner, this means it's acceptable for charging roughly 5 times the price of an individual miniature. As they cost so many points in game, people will still feel happy enough about it, as they still represent a sizable chunk of their army that they're allowed to field. So now we've designed the miniatures, how should we release them? Firstly, I'd say that a constant drip feed of miniatures is preferable. Sure, you might have the vast majority of an edition's codexes all ready to go right from the start, but releasing them all at once would overwhelm people's wallets. They might have to pick and choose between the various factions on offer, whereas if you release one army, make it new and exciting, tempt a lot of people in, then they might be ready to make some more purchases on other things another 6 months down the line. By having a constantly rolling release schedule, you'll keep people waiting for the next thing, and you'll create a nice sense of the hobby progressing. If you released everything all at once, then I think that you'd run the risk of people getting bored in the meantime before they get another big release. It is worth having a fair few discount kits among the range. As we said, it's good for hooking in new players, and it can also help really drive sales of old miniatures. Sure, the ones in the box might not really have been the ones that you exactly wanted, but I guess if they're a fair bit cheaper than normal, I guess it's not all that bad. People might not realise that they're not really getting all that much value out of the boxes if all they were getting extra was a character that they didn't want, or another copy of an old release that they already have multiple times. One great tactic that you can apply to these discount kits is doing a limited release run. You can tell that these are really popular with the community due to how fast they tend to sell out. You can harness a nice bit of fear of missing out, you guarantee that you sell all the stock that you can print, and does it really matter whether you're selling to the general public or scalpers who will help distribute the miniatures further for you? By making things a little bit harder to get, you'll really drive up community demand, so when your next limited release run comes out, people will be at hair-trigger alerts to try and buy it as soon as possible. Finally, it's important to tread the delicate balance between keeping the game good and interesting, and also using strong rules as a direct marketing technique. It's quite nice to keep the process of power creep rolling. I'd aim, if possible, for every new release to be slightly above average, maybe not literally the best unit in the game, though of course that won't hurt, but it's going to be far more easy to get people excited about buying new miniatures and codexes if they're going to be new, interesting, and a little bit stronger than some of the other options that came before. Of course, that's always going to lead to a bit of an imbalance. The factions with the most recent updates are going to be far stronger than the ones that were updated ages ago, but that's a small price to pay to have people hankering after the new things, and the genuine excitement and anticipation that's built up when a new codex comes out. When codexes are released, there should be a mandatory update to the faction. Either you buy this, or you essentially don't own the rules to your faction anymore. I wouldn't worry too much about whether you've just released a book for the same faction. Even if the last update was less than a year ago, that shouldn't stop you from making a new book if it makes sense financially. In particular, it's certainly worth updating the poster boy factions far more regularly than normal. That way you can keep their rules strong, which will please all of the players, and also it'll net you a whole load more direct sales, as there's more of those players to begin with. You can even double down on book sales with a supplement system. You can add more in-depth rules for each individual sub-faction, and also force the players to buy 2 books, one for the main army, and then one for a fairly small amount of special rules that will unquestionably make that army stronger. Finally, regularly rebalancing the game can be really quite a lot of effort, but it can help you out in multiple ways. It keeps the game from getting too stale, so that there's always new things and new challenges to meet up to, but it also means that some of the best power lists are always going to be something new, so people have to buy new things to make them. Even just tweaking a whole load of points cost to make some things better and some things worse for a faction might encourage people to buy an extra unit or 2 for their army if one of the lesser played units suddenly gets very good. If you really want to triple down on the benefits of this, maybe you can even ask people to pay for these new updated points costs in a book called Chapter Approved. So hopefully that guide will help people out if they are making their own miniature companies and want to dominate the world of tabletop wargaming and make more sales of models. In all seriousness, I do know that Games Workshop is a company and it is their job to try and maximise their own profits, but that doesn't mean that we can't poke fun from time to time. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. Normally I do a few more proper discussions about the hobby and tactics in it, so feel free to subscribe or check back later if you'd like to see more. Finally, for my own sales tactics, I'd just like to mention that the channel has a Patreon page, which is how I can afford to spend so much time making videos about model soldiers. If you have been enjoying the videos regularly, any support is massively appreciated, as the Patreon page is what keeps them coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, such as seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the prize giveaways where I post out some miniatures each month. If any of that sounds interesting, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.